Picture this. 6 agonizing hours of relentless radio warnings cutting through the static. American naval commanders were practically ordering a rogue cargo vessel to power down, but they received absolute radio silence in return. Instead of altering course, this ship just kept plowing through the choppy waters of the North Arabian Sea, holding a steady 17 knots straight for Bandar Abbas. It was acting as if the undisputed heavyweights of the open ocean weren't blocking its path. That arrogance ended the second the USS Spruance authorized a kinetic strike right into the vessel's engine room. What followed was textbook military precision. Within moments, elite operators from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit descended from assault helicopters, fast roping directly onto the deck of the MV Tosca. In a flash, the bridge was breached. The captain and crew were detained, and the massive shipping containers were locked down. Today, whatever was hidden inside those steel boxes is locked away in American high-tech laboratories, undergoing intense scrutiny. Now, Washington is keeping the official cargo manifest strictly classified. But the silence was shattered when Donald Trump stepped in front of the CNBC cameras. Staring dead into the lens, he delivered a chillingly clear message that left zero room for interpretation. We caught a ship that had some things on it which wasn't very nice. A gift from China. Perhaps it was a singular, calculated sentence broadcast to the entire globe, acting as a geopolitical laser pointer aimed squarely at the heart of Beijing. We all know the Strait of Hormuz has been an absolute powder keg lately. We've seen carrier strike groups deploying naval cordons established, and the Ghost Fleet getting cornered in the Indian Ocean with tankers retreating the second they hit the enforcement line. But the events that unfolded on the morning of April 19th rewrite the entire playbook. This wasn't just a standard maritime interdiction. This was the violent unmasking of a shadow pipeline that has been operating right under our noses for 4 decades. We are talking about a highly sophisticated artery funneling assets from Chinese shipping hubs directly into the bloodstream of Iran's weapons manufacturing. And the U.S. military didn't just stumble upon it, they mapped it, bagged the hard evidence, and put it on the permanent record. The shock waves from the belly of that cargo ship are about to trigger a seismic shift in how America handles China and Iran, fundamentally rewiring the global maritime order. No temporary ceasefire, no backroom deal, and no neatly typed diplomatic memo is going to put this genie back in the bottle. Buckle up, because we need to break this down. Make no mistake, what went down on the deck of the MV Tosca isn't the final chapter of this saga. It's the opening scene of a geopolitical nightmare that Beijing cannot simply spin its way out of. Let's look at the vessel itself, because its starting point and final destination rip right through any illusion of plausible deniability. Flying an Iranian flag, the Tosca pushed off from the port of Zhuhai in southern China, carving out a roughly 3,700-mile track straight for Bandar Abbas in Iran. And Zhuhai isn't just some random commercial dock. Intelligence, previously highlighted by the Washington Post, pinned this exact location as a vital hub where Tehran actively sources the chemical building blocks for its ballistic missile engines, steaming at a brisk 17 knots toward Iran's most critical southern naval hub. The ship's crew blatantly ignored the USS Spruance. 6 straight hours of blaring naval warnings. Think about that for a second. For a quarter of a day, the operators running that ship weighed the odds and decided that whatever they had hidden in the hold was absolutely worth taking a hit from an American guided missile destroyer in the middle of a hot blockade zone. That kind of gamble reveals the payload's true value long before the first shipping container is pried open. You don't shrug off the U.S. Navy and risk getting your engine room blown apart unless the freight you're hauling is worth far more than the deadly consequences of getting caught. According to reports from the Wall Street Journal, The Tosca is just one piece of a much larger ghost fleet, one specifically tasked with running missile-grade chemicals into Iran. In the past year alone, sister ships in this shadow network reportedly slipped 1,000 tons of solid fuel precursors from Chinese docks directly to Iranian shores. And the suspected manifest for this specific run, we're looking at a lethal cocktail: sodium perchlorate, advanced electronics, and specialized metal tubing. Put them together, and you have the exact shopping list required to stand up and launch a functional ballistic missile. Let's be crystal clear. Sodium perchlorate isn't a benign chemical you find in everyday commercial manufacturing. It is the absolute core oxidizer needed to ignite solid rocket fuel. Take that off the board, and Iran simply cannot mass-produce the Shahab and Imad ballistic missiles, the very weapons capable of dropping warheads anywhere from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. If the Tosca was packed with this chemical on a scale matching the fleet's previous smuggling runs, the U.S. Navy didn't just stop a rogue cargo ship, they physically crippled the weapons assembly line of a regime that has been actively targeting American allies throughout this entire conflict. This is exactly why Trump didn't need to read off the manifest to make his point. When he casually mentioned the ship was carrying things that weren't very nice and floated the idea of a gift from China, it was not an off-the-cuff remark. It was a calculated sniper shot. He publicly put Beijing on trial while keeping the hard, granular proof close to his chest, locking the exact details in the vault until the moment it can be deployed for maximum diplomatic leverage. That hammer hasn't dropped just yet, but the smoking gun is safely locked in American hands. And unlike political rhetoric, cold hard evidence never expires. Now, let's rewind the clock to the exact hours before the boarding team hit the deck. The timing here exposes a level of hypocrisy so glaring that no amount of diplomatic spin can cover it up. On the very same day the U.S. Navy took down the Tosca, Chinese President Xi Jinping was on the phone with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. His official message: the Strait of Hormuz has to remain open. He insisted it's a vital international waterway that must be protected for the sake of the global economy. Bloomberg even flagged it as Xi's most aggressive public pushback against Iran choking off the strait. So, on the world stage, China is looking the Gulf's biggest oil player in the eye and declaring that Iran's blockade is dead wrong. But while that phone call was happening, a completely different reality was playing out on the water. A freighter hardwired into the Chinese defense apparatus, launching from a port specifically tracked by U.S. intelligence as a weapons procurement hub, was making a massive 700-mile run straight for Iran's premier military dock. Its payload, the exact materials required to mass-produce ballistic missiles. Let that sink in. China is telling the Saudis they want the strait open, while a Chinese-linked vessel is actively running a blockade to hand-deliver missile components to the very regime trying to shut it down. These two narratives cannot exist in the same universe. It leaves only two chilling conclusions. Either Beijing knew exactly what was in those containers and the Saudi phone call was a calculated deception, or the Chinese government doesn't actually control its own defense supply chains, meaning a 40-year-old weapons pipeline to Iran is operating as a rogue, autonomous entity. This is exactly why Trump's casual, on-camera remark was so devastating. It wasn't a formal legal indictment. It was a surgical, diplomatic precision strike. He delivered it perfectly, like someone simply pointing out a massive breach of trust and put it in a frequency that Xi Jinping simply cannot respond to without trapping himself. If Beijing tries to hit back at the implication, they either have to confess that they broke a massive geopolitical understanding, or they have to aggressively push the lie that the ship had zero ties to China, which the entire global intelligence community already knows is a total fabrication. Naturally, Beijing's response was immediate, predictable, and fully exposed their panic. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs scrambled to do damage control, flat out rejecting any malicious association. They tried to brush the Tosca off as just some random foreign container vessel and push back hard against the rumors. But then, in the exact same press cycle, they suddenly declared they were deeply concerned that the U.S. Navy had intercepted the ship. Listen to the mental gymnastics there. In one breath, they claim they have absolutely nothing to do with this boat. And in the next, they are fiercely protesting its seizure. That is not a mistranslation. That is the sound of a terrified institutional voice trying to straddle two completely contradictory lies at the same time, knowing full well that neither cover story is going to survive the light of day. To truly grasp why that seemingly off-the-cuff remark on CNBC hit like an earthquake, you have to pull back the lens and examine a shadow alliance, 4 decades in the making. The military handshake between Beijing and Tehran wasn't forged yesterday. It was hammered out in the fires of the Iran-Iraq War back in the 1980s, with China quietly funneling weapons to the Iranian front lines. Fast forward past the Cold War, and Beijing wasn't just shipping crates of ammunition, they were exporting the very DNA of Iran's modern missile apparatus. China's CSS-8 tactical rockets literally served as the foundational blueprint for Iran's Tandar ballistic missiles. Those C-802 anti-ship missiles, they mutated into the exact same naval killers that Houthi militants are currently using to terrorize the Red Sea. And let's not forget the infamous silkworm tech transfers moves that slapped American sanctions onto Beijing precisely because they were blatantly moving lethal military hardware under the guise of civilian trade. But here is the grim reality of global diplomacy. International pressure never actually severed the pipeline. It just forced it underground. The moment one corporate front got blacklisted, a new one spawned to take its place. They carved out new smuggling routes, birthed new middlemen, and kept the lethal supply chain pumping, carefully buried beneath layers of doctored shipping manifests and fake corporate letterheads. When Beijing and Tehran recently paraded their 2 5-year comprehensive strategic partnership in front of the cameras, they sold it to the world as a harmless mutual benefit Chinese cash for Iranian crude. It was dressed up in the polite boardroom language of infrastructure and economic development. But that was just the camouflage. Sitting just beneath that civilian surface was a massive conduit for dual-use technology. We're talking about high-grade components stamped for civilian use but engineered to the exact tolerances required for military conversion. It's the ultimate dark money trade, purposely kept out of official state documents to grant everyone involved a bulletproof wall of plausible deniability. This is exactly what makes the MV Tosca slipping out of Zhuhai so explosive. It is the definitive smoking gun. It proves that despite 40 years of American economic warfare, UN Security Council debates, and Beijing's own hollow pledges regarding non-proliferation, this illicit pipeline never stopped flowing. But here is the fatal blow for this shadow network. The U.S. intelligence community has now completely dissected the beast. They have mapped the cargo containers, tracked the suppliers, untangled the payment channels, and burned the shell companies specifically designed to mask the Chinese source from the Iranian destination. Every intermediary dock, every logistics hub used to wash this cargo clean, it is all sitting on a radar screen in Washington. If this syndicate wants to rebuild, they have to start from absolute zero on every single level, knowing full well that American eyes are tracking every new channel from the second the first dime changes hands. Now, zoom out and look at the massive strategic nightmare this creates for Beijing across the entire global chessboard. What the United States Navy just demonstrated out in the North Arabian Sea sends a shockwave from the Strait of Hormuz straight through the Malacca Strait, all the way to the South China Sea. They proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that America can and will drop the hammer on any vessel, on any shipping lane, anywhere on the planet, the second the payload justifies a takedown. Remember, the Tosca wasn't cornered in American waters. It wasn't snagged inside some official maritime quarantine zone. It was boarded in the dead center of the open ocean simply because American intelligence locked onto it at the departure dock, tracked its every move, analyzed the threat level of its cargo, and picked the exact tactical window to strike. For over a decade, Beijing has pumped billions into its Belt and Road Initiative, desperately trying to sell the world on a new global logistics empire, one completely untouchable by American influence. That pipeline from Zhuhai to Bandar Abbas, that was supposed to be a main artery. They bought up port infrastructure from Morocco to Pakistan to Sri Lanka, specifically engineering supply chains to bypass choke points controlled by Washington. But the takedown of the MV Tosca just shattered that illusion. It proved that this so-called alternative architecture is wide open. All that Chinese port investment, useless. Those high-level diplomatic handshakes, worthless. The massive economic leverage Beijing holds over these transit nations, it couldn't stop a squad of U.S. Marines from taking that deck. The brutal reality is this: if a vessel is operating for Beijing, American naval intelligence will hunt it down, and once they find it, American naval firepower will stop it. The coordinates might change, but the ultimate outcome is exactly the same. This is a terrifying precedent for China's military planners. It applies directly to the Scarborough Shoal, where their maritime militias are currently swarming. It applies to the Bashi Channel, the critical choke point their naval fleets must cross to break into the open Pacific. It casts a massive shadow over the Strait of Malacca, the vulnerable bottleneck where 80% of China's seaborne energy imports flow. And you better believe it applies in the Taiwan Strait, the exact same waters where Spruance-class destroyers, just like the one that crippled the Tosca, routinely run freedom of navigation patrols. The bottom line is that Beijing is completely incapable of shielding its shadow logistics network from American interdiction. They couldn't save the Tosca, and they have absolutely zero power to guarantee the safety of the next ship American intel decides to flag. The ripple effect is already tearing through the market. Every shipping conglomerate, every dark money financier, and every middleman tied to the China-Iran pipeline is suddenly doing some very stressful math. Insurance premiums for vessels running these routes are already skyrocketing. Corporate fronts that used to happily wash these transactions are now staring at the very real threat of American seizure and asking themselves if the paycheck is actually worth the crosshairs. Right now, every single link in that 40-year-old chain is sweating, wondering if it's time to break. But the fallout doesn't stop at military intelligence. It bleeds directly into a geoeconomic nightmare that Beijing is desperately trying to contain. Right now, China is sitting on roughly 139 billion barrels in its strategic petroleum reserve. That sounds like a lot. But at their current burn rate, it buys them maybe 120 days. The panic is already setting in. Beijing just slammed the door on refined fuel exports to protect their domestic stockpile. Look at the teapot refineries in Shandong province. These independent facilities make up a quarter of China's entire refining backbone. Sure, they can run on reserves for a minute, but their entire business model is a house of cards built on black market. Heavily discounted Iranian crude, they survive on those illicit margins. Force them to buy legal oil on the open global market at standard commercial prices. Those margins don't just shrink, they evaporate entirely. We aren't just looking at an energy headache. We are looking at a full-blown energy crisis crashing head-on into massive unemployment in China's industrial heartland. And this isn't a problem for the next decade. This economic bomb goes off in a matter of months. Meanwhile, The U.S. blockade choking off the Tosca means Iran's missile factories are starving at the exact same moment China's fuel supply is stretched to the breaking point. Now factor in the Gulf. Over 40% of China's crude flows out of the Middle East. Beijing has pumped north of $90 billion into trade with the UAE alone. We are talking about hundreds of billions in committed capital, from the Khalifa port to Saudi mega projects to Iraqi oil fields. But those investments only pay out if the region is stable. Every time Iran lobs a ballistic missile at Gulf infrastructure, they are literally blowing up Chinese profit margins. Every Shahed drone that slams into a UAE facility is a direct hit on infrastructure owned partly by Chinese state-backed firms. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps isn't just picking a fight with the U.S. military. They are actively burning down the economic empire. Beijing spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars to build. This is the real reason Beijing is absolutely furious with Tehran behind closed doors. It has nothing to do with morality or international law. It is pure, cold-blooded calculus. Iran's escalation is destroying China's regional return on investment, all while giving the U.S. Navy the perfect legal cover to make interdicting Chinese shipping the new undeniable normal. And watch closely, because that so-called impenetrable axis of Russia, China, and Iran, the Grand Alliance, supposed to dethrone American dominance, is cracking under the weight of the Tosca seizure. Just look at Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. He steps up to the mic, bashes the American blockade, defends Iran's nuclear ambitions, and preaches undying solidarity. But in the exact same breath, he casually mentions that Moscow is more than happy to step up and supply energy to China and anyone else suffering from the crisis. It's a masterclass in geopolitical backstabbing. Moscow is giving Tehran a friendly pat on the back while aggressively stealing their biggest customer. Every barrel of Iranian oil blocked from reaching China is a barrel Russia happily sells at a premium. Because Iran is effectively erased from the chessboard, Russia's energy profits have doubled since the blockade dropped. China, panicked and desperate for fuel, is becoming completely subservient to Russian energy, on terms dictated entirely by Putin. Moscow isn't throwing Iran a lifeline. They are monetizing Iran's collapse. And China isn't defending Tehran. They are desperately trying to scrub their fingerprints off the Tosca's cargo, while keeping just enough of the pipeline open to get cheap oil and keep Iran armed enough to distract the West. But the MV Tosca just blew that delicate balancing act to pieces. The cargo is sitting in an American vault. Intelligence analysts are tearing the shipping data apart. The shadow network is fully illuminated. And Trump is holding this smoking gun as the ultimate leverage in trade wars with Beijing. Right as the Iran nuclear talks in Islamabad hit a critical phase, when Trump said war works this way, he wasn't just talking about combat. He was sending a much larger, colder message. This is how the global order works. And we still hold the reins. The United States is weaponizing this intelligence for maximum damage. In the trade war, it hands Washington a sledgehammer. In Islamabad, it proves Tehran was secretly running weapons during a so-called ceasefire. For the Gulf states, it is hard proof that American protection isn't just talk, it's active. Aggressive enforcement. This kind of evidence doesn't have an expiration date. It only grows more lethal as the U.S. finds new battlefields to deploy it on. For Tehran, this seizure is a multi-dimensional catastrophe. First, it physically chokes off the sodium perchlorate vital for their Shahab and Imad ballistic missiles. Without this solid fuel precursor, production stalls, stockpiles drain, and Iran's primary deterrent against Israel in the Gulf begins to crumble. But the intelligence fallout is even worse. By cracking those shipping containers, American analysts just downloaded the complete blueprint of Iran's shadow logistics network. Every shell company, transit port, and dark money channel is now burned. Tehran must rebuild this entire web from scratch while bleeding $500 million a day and suffering deep internal regime chaos, knowing American eyes are now tracking their every move. This operation also permanently torpedoes the Islamabad ceasefire talks. The U.S. now holds hard proof that while Iranian diplomats were talking peace, their military was actively smuggling missile components out of China. It proves Tehran's diplomatic word is worthless, which is exactly why Trump declared that extending the ceasefire is highly unlikely. For the Gulf states and Israel, this is the concrete, physical evidence they've demanded for years. For Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, every intercepted shipment directly translates to fewer missiles pointed at their infrastructure. For Israel, systematically degrading Iran's ballistic capabilities buys invaluable strategic depth, fundamentally shifting Netanyahu's operational calculus regarding Lebanon and Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Zoom out, and the sheer scale of the MV Tosca takedown is staggering. In a matter of minutes, a single U.S. boarding party exposed a 40-year-old weapons pipeline, fractured the Russia-China-Iran axis, and handed Washington the ultimate geopolitical trump card. When Trump called the cargo a gift from China, it wasn't a throwaway line. It was a calculated, chilling warning to Beijing, Tehran, and every shadow broker on Earth. We found your network. We have the evidence. We know exactly who you are. The true brutality of what happened at Hormuz wasn't the gunfire or the fast-roping Marines. It is the hard evidence currently sitting in American laboratories, acting as a ticking time bomb of leverage that Washington will detonate at the exact moment it inflicts maximum strategic damage. The U.S. Navy just proved it still unequivocally controls the global maritime order. Anywhere, at any time. And that is a brutal reality that neither China nor Iran can simply undo. At the end of the day, the MV Tosca takedown is more than just a military interdiction. It is a masterclass in modern geopolitical warfare. My takeaway is simple. While world leaders smile for the cameras and sign treaties in brightly lit rooms, the actual struggle for global dominance is fought in the shadows on the open oceans, deep within shipping manifests, and inside quiet intelligence laboratories. The ultimate lesson for all of us is to never take diplomatic rhetoric at face value. When nations preach peace but secretly prepare for conflict, you must watch their supply lines, not their press briefings. True power isn't just about the weapons you can launch. It is about the invisible logistics networks you can expose and dismantle without ever declaring war. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and truly understand the unseen forces shaping our world order, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like to support the channel, and share this breakdown with anyone who needs to see what is actually happening behind the geopolitical curtain. What do you think Beijing's next move will be? Let me know in the comments below. Stay sharp, and I will see you next time.